Hello students, in this lecture we see the concept of types of log records. In previous lecture we have seen the concept of log records. That is the most commonly used technique for recovery is based on log records. And log records basically contains all the sequence of records containing all the transaction details in the database. So there are several types of log records. An update log record describes the single database write. It has following fields. Whenever you see the log records, that log record has the following field. First field is transaction identifier, which is the unique identifier of the transaction that performed the write operation. Data item identifier, which is the unique identifier of the data item written. Typically, it is location on the disk of the data item. Next is old value, which is the value of data item prior to write. And new value is the value of the data item which is after the write operation. So these four things are there in the log record. These four things can be represented like angular bracket Ti, Xj, V1, V2, indicating that transaction Ti has performed a write on data item Xj and the value of Xj before the write is V1 and after write it is V2. So Xj had value V1 before write and has value V2 after write. We have another special log records exist to record significant events during transaction processing, such as start of transaction and the commit or abort of transaction. So these log records also mention or it can show when the transaction gets started, when it is committed or when it is aborted. So Ti start means transaction Ti has started. Ti commit means transaction Ti has committed, and Ti abort means transaction Ti is aborted. So these log records show all the information about the values in the database. It shows where the transaction gets started, when it is stopped and when it is aborted. For log records, this successful for recovery from the system and disk failure, the log must reside in the stable storage. Since it is stored in the stable storage, then only it is possible to recover the data from these log records. For log records to be useful for recovery from system and disk failures, the log must reside in stable storage. The transaction performs some computation in its own private part of the main memory. The transaction modifies the data block in the disk buffer in main memory holding the data item, and the database system executes the output operation that writes the data block to disk. The transaction modifies the database if it performs an update on a disk buffer or on the disk itself. Update to private part of the main memory do not count as database modification. If the transaction does not modify the database until it has committed, it is said to use the deferred modification technique. So this is all about the log records. Thanks for listening.